The sprawling Miller Ranch in eastern Colorado stretched across 12,000 acres of rolling prairie and wheat fields, a fourth-generation family operation that had weathered drought, economic hardship, and the changing landscape of American agriculture. On Sunday, June 15, 2014, the ranch was bustling with the sounds of an extended family gathering as three generations of Millers came together for their annual summer barbecue, a tradition that had been maintained for over 30 years. The smell of grilling meat mingled with the sweet scent of prairie grass and the warm afternoon air, while children's laughter echoed across the wide expanse of farmland that surrounded the main ranch house. 12-year-old Lucas Miller stood at the edge of the backyard, squinting into the distance as he surveyed the seemingly endless fields that comprised his grandfather's domain. Lucas lived in Denver with his parents, making the 2-hour drive to the ranch a special adventure that he looked forward to all year. The wide open spaces and sense of freedom that came with ranch life were a stark contrast to his suburban existence, and he treasured these opportunities to explore the land that had been in his family for generations. His cousin, 10-year-old Sarah Miller, emerged from the ranch house, carrying a plate of freshly cut watermelon that her grandmother had prepared for the children. Sarah lived on a smaller farm about 50 miles from the ranch with her parents, making her more familiar with rural life than Lucas, though the sheer scale of their grandfather's operations still impressed her every time she visited. The cousins had always been close, despite seeing each other only a few times each year, sharing a love of adventure and exploration that made their reunions special occasions. "Want to go see the new calves?" Sarah asked, gesturing toward the pasture where their grandfather kept his cattle operation. The Miller Ranch was primarily focused on wheat farming, but Robert Miller maintained a small herd of cattle, both for supplemental income and because he genuinely enjoyed working with livestock. The newest additions to the herd had been born just a few weeks earlier, and Sarah knew that Lucas would be excited to see the young animals. Lucas nodded enthusiastically, finishing the last bite of his hamburger before following Sarah toward the cattle pasture. The barbecue was in full swing, with nearly 20 family members gathered around picnic tables that had been set up in the shade of the mature cottonwood trees that surrounded the ranch house. The adults were engaged in the kind of relaxed conversation that characterized family gatherings, catching up on news from different branches of the family tree and sharing stories about their children's accomplishments and challenges. Robert Miller, the family patriarch at 74 years old, was tending the massive grill that he had constructed himself from an old propane tank, a piece of equipment that had become legendary within the family for its ability to feed large crowds. His weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency as he flipped steaks and adjusted the positioning of corn on the cob, while keeping one eye on the grandchildren who were playing various games around the yard. Lucas's father, Michael Miller, was deep in conversation with his brother David about the challenges facing modern farming operations, while their wives supervised the younger children and organized the seemingly endless supply of side dishes that always appeared at family gatherings. The atmosphere was relaxed and joyful, with the kind of easy camaraderie that develops among people who share both blood relations and common experiences of rural life. Sarah's mother, Jennifer Miller, noticed her daughter and nephew heading toward the cattle pasture and called out a reminder about staying away from the fence line where the bull was kept separated from the rest of the herd. The children waved acknowledgement of her warning, though both had heard similar instructions numerous times during previous visits and understood the basic safety rules that governed life on a working ranch. The cattle pasture was located approximately 200 yards from the ranch house, accessible via a well-worn path that led through a small grove of trees before opening into the expansive grazing area where the Miller family's herd spent their days. Lucas and Sarah walked together along the familiar route, chatting about their school experiences and comparing notes about their different perspectives on rural versus urban life. The new calves were even more adorable than Sarah had remembered from her last visit to the ranch, their spotted coats gleaming in the afternoon sunlight as they stayed close to their mothers while occasionally venturing short distances to explore their surroundings. Lucas was fascinated by the animals, having limited exposure to livestock during his city upbringing, and Sarah enjoyed playing the role of the more experienced farm kid as she explained the behavior patterns and characteristics of the different animals. After spending approximately 20 minutes watching the cattle and taking turns trying to coax the more adventurous calves closer to the fence, Lucas pointed toward the vast wheat fields that stretched beyond the pasture area. The golden grain swayed gently in the afternoon breeze, creating a mesmerizing pattern that seemed to extend endlessly toward the horizon. "Want to explore out there?" Lucas asked, his city-bred curiosity about the farming operation evident in his eager expression. He had heard family stories about getting lost in wheat fields during harvest season, but the idea of walking through the tall grain seemed like an adventure rather than a danger to his 12-year-old imagination. Sarah considered the suggestion, weighing her familiarity with farm safety against her own desire for adventure and her reluctance to disappoint her older cousin. The wheat fields were generally considered safe during daylight hours, and both children were responsible enough to maintain their sense of direction and not venture too far from the ranch buildings. The fields also offered the kind of exploration opportunities that made visits to the ranch special occasions. "Okay, but we can't go too far," Sarah agreed, opening the gate that led from the cattle pasture into the farming area of the ranch. "And we have to stay together and keep track of where we are. These fields are bigger than they look, and it's easy to get turned around once you're inside them." The cousins entered the wheat field at approximately 2:30 p.m., following a tractor path that provided access for farming equipment and offered a clear route through the tall grain. The wheat was approaching harvest readiness, standing nearly 4 feet tall and creating a golden corridor that seemed to lead toward adventure and discovery. Lucas was immediately enchanted by the experience of walking through the grain field, marveling at the way the wheat created walls on either side of the tractor path, while still allowing glimpses of the sky overhead. The rustling of the grain in the breeze created a peaceful soundtrack that was unlike anything he experienced in his urban environment, and he felt a deeper connection to his family's agricultural heritage than he had ever experienced before. Sarah, though more familiar with farming operations, was equally excited about their exploration. She had visited wheat fields before, but never with a companion who shared her sense of adventure and curiosity about the farming life that was such an integral part of their family identity. The cousins walked deeper into the field, following the tractor path while stopping occasionally to examine interesting insects or plants that caught their attention. The tractor path they were following curved gently to the left after approximately 300 yards, leading toward a section of the field that was slightly elevated and would provide a better view of the surrounding area. Lucas and Sarah decided to follow the path to its highest point, thinking that they would be able to see the ranch house from there and get a better sense of the overall layout of their grandfather's farming operation. However, Lucas and Sarah Miller never returned from their exploration of the wheat fields that afternoon. When 3 o'clock arrived and the extended family began organizing group activities for the younger children, Jennifer Miller realized that she hadn't seen her daughter or nephew for over 30 minutes. Her initial assumption was that they were still watching the cattle, or had perhaps returned to the ranch house through a different route. When a quick search of the ranch house and immediate yard area revealed no sign of either child, Jennifer began calling their names while walking toward the cattle pasture where she had last seen them heading. Michael Miller joined the search when he heard his wife calling for the children, and together they traced the path that Lucas and Sarah had taken toward the livestock area. The cattle pasture showed clear evidence that the children had been there recently. The gate leading to the farming area was open, and small footprints in the soft earth near the fence line indicated that they had spent time watching the animals. More concerning was the discovery that the gate leading into the wheat fields was also open, suggesting that the cousins had decided to explore beyond the designated play areas that the family had established for the children's safety. Michael Miller immediately called for help from the other adults at the barbecue, explaining that Lucas and Sarah appeared to have entered the wheat fields and had not returned as expected. Robert Miller, despite his advanced age, was among the first to respond to the search effort, his decades of experience working the land giving him valuable insight into the challenges and dangers that children might encounter in the vast farming operation. The initial search of the wheat fields began at 3:30 p.m., with adult family members spreading out along different tractor paths and calling the children's names continuously. The searchers were optimistic that Lucas and Sarah would respond quickly to their calls, assuming that the cousins had simply lost track of time while exploring and would emerge from the grain fields as soon as they heard familiar voices calling for them. However, the wheat fields proved to be more challenging to search than the family had anticipated. The grain was tall enough to completely conceal children who were walking between the rows, and the tractor paths formed a complex network that could be confusing even to adults who were familiar with the field layout. Sounds were muffled by the density of the grain, making it difficult for voices to carry over long distances. After 1 hour of searching without finding any trace of the missing children, Robert Miller made the decision to contact the Garfield County Sheriff's Department. As a lifelong rancher, he understood the potential dangers that the wheat fields could pose to inexperienced children, and he recognized that professional search and rescue resources would be needed if Lucas and Sarah had become seriously lost or injured. Sheriff Patricia Lopez arrived at the Miller Ranch at 4:45 p.m., accompanied by 2 deputies and a coordinator from the county's search and rescue team. Lopez was a 20-year veteran of rural law enforcement who had responded to numerous cases involving missing children in agricultural areas, and she understood the urgency that such situations required. The sheriff's immediate assessment was that Lucas and Sarah had likely become disoriented within the complex layout of the wheat fields and were unable to find their way back to familiar landmarks. The fields covered over 800 acres, with numerous tractor paths that intersected and curved in ways that could confuse even adults who were not intimately familiar with the specific layout. Sheriff Lopez organized a systematic search of the wheat fields, using techniques that had been developed specifically for agricultural environments. Search teams were assigned to specific sections of the field, with each team following designated paths while maintaining radio contact with a central coordinator. The searchers called the children's names continuously, while also listening for any sounds that might indicate their location. As evening approached, additional resources were brought in to assist with the search operation. Volunteers from the local community arrived to help cover the vast area of farmland, while specialized search and rescue teams from neighboring counties provided expertise in locating missing persons in rural environments. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras were requested from the state police to provide aerial surveillance of the search area. The thermal imaging flights began at sunset, with aircraft flying grid patterns over the Miller Ranch while scanning for heat signatures that might indicate the presence of the missing children. The wheat fields appeared as uniform golden surfaces from the air, with the tractor paths visible as dark lines cutting through the grain, but no human heat signatures were detected during the initial aerial searches. As darkness fell, the ground search continued using powerful spotlights and search dogs that had been brought in from the state capitol. The bloodhounds were able to track Lucas and Sarah's scent from the cattle pasture into the wheat fields, following their path along the tractor roads for approximately half a mile, before the trail became confused and eventually disappeared entirely. The loss of the scent trail was particularly troubling to search coordinators, as it suggested that the children's trail had been disrupted by some factor other than the natural passage of time. Officer Maria Santos, who worked with the K-9 unit, explained that scent trails could be affected by weather conditions, the presence of other strong odors, or changes in terrain, but the abrupt ending of the trail was unusual. Throughout the night of June 15th and into the early morning hours of June 16th, the search for Lucas and Sarah continued without interruption. Family members took turns participating in the search efforts while others maintained a vigil at the ranch house, hoping for news and preparing food and coffee for the volunteers who were working tirelessly to find the missing children. Detective Haynes Rodriguez of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation arrived at the Miller Ranch on the morning of June 16th to take charge of what was now being treated as a potential abduction case. Rodriguez was a specialist in missing persons investigations who had worked dozens of cases involving children who had disappeared in rural areas throughout Colorado and neighboring states. Detective Rodriguez's first step was to conduct detailed interviews with every family member who had been present at the barbecue, seeking to establish a comprehensive timeline of the children's movements and to identify any unusual incidents or observations that might provide clues about their disappearance. The interviews revealed no obvious red flags or concerning interactions, with all family members describing Lucas and Sarah as responsible children who understood basic safety rules. The investigation expanded to include background checks on all ranch employees and anyone who had recent contact with the Miller family. Robert Miller employed several seasonal workers to help with farming operations, and Detective Rodriguez needed to verify the whereabouts and activities of everyone who had access to the ranch property. One name that emerged during this investigation was concerning: Dale Peterson, a drifter who had worked briefly for the Miller Ranch during the spring planting season before being terminated for attendance problems and erratic behavior. Peterson had been living in a trailer park approximately 15 miles from the ranch, and ranch foreman Tom Bradley reported that Peterson had made several inappropriate comments about the Miller family's wealth and lifestyle. When investigators attempted to locate Peterson for questioning, they discovered that he had left the trailer park abruptly on the evening of June 15th, just hours after Lucas and Sarah's disappearance was reported to authorities. Peterson's sudden departure, combined with his previous employment at the ranch and his knowledge of the property layout, made him a person of interest in the children's disappearance. The search for Dale Peterson became a priority for law enforcement agencies throughout Colorado and neighboring states. His photograph and vehicle description were distributed to police departments across the region, and his information was entered into national databases for missing persons and wanted fugitives. However, Peterson proved to be elusive, with no confirmed sightings despite extensive efforts to locate him. As days passed without any trace of Lucas and Sarah, the investigation began to focus more heavily on the possibility that they had been abducted rather than simply becoming lost in the wheat fields. The systematic search of the farming area had covered every section of the 800-acre field multiple times, using both ground teams and aerial surveillance, without finding any evidence of the children's presence. Detective Rodriguez worked with behavioral analysts to develop theories about what might have motivated someone to target the Miller family's children during a family gathering. The theories ranged from opportunistic crime by someone who happened to be in the area, to planned abduction by someone who had been observing the family's routines and had specifically chosen the barbecue as an opportunity to access the children. The Miller family struggled to cope with the devastating uncertainty of not knowing what had happened to Lucas and Sarah. The annual barbecue that was supposed to strengthen family bonds had instead become the setting for an unimaginable tragedy that left everyone questioning their assumptions about safety and security in rural areas. Michael Miller took extended leave from his job in Denver to coordinate search efforts and work with investigators, while Jennifer Miller found herself unable to function normally as she waited for news about her daughter and nephew. Robert Miller, despite his advanced age, continued to participate in search activities and refused to accept that the children might not be found alive. The first-year anniversary of the disappearance brought renewed media attention and fresh appeals for information about Lucas and Sarah's fate. Detective Rodriguez appeared on national television programs, asking for tips about Dale Peterson and emphasizing that the investigation remained active despite the passage of time. As years passed, the case gradually transitioned from an active investigation to a cold case that was reviewed periodically but had no new leads to pursue. Lucas would have started high school in 2017, while Sarah would have entered middle school the same year. Their families observed these milestones with private grief and continued hope that someday they would learn what had happened to the children. Detective Rodriguez retired from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation in 2019, but he continued working on the Miller case as a consultant, reviewing evidence and following up on tips that continued to emerge sporadically. He had developed a personal connection to the family and felt responsible for finding answers about the children's fate. The breakthrough in the case came in September 2023, 9 years after Lucas and Sarah's disappearance. A severe drought had lowered water levels throughout eastern Colorado, exposing areas of creek beds and irrigation channels that had been submerged for years. A rancher checking his water rights along Buffalo Creek, approximately 12 miles from the Miller Ranch, made a discovery that would finally provide answers about the missing children. Partially buried in the dried creek bed, rancher Bill Henderson found what appeared to be the remains of a small vehicle that had been submerged for an extended period. The vehicle was a rusted pickup truck that matched the description of the truck that Dale Peterson had been driving when he disappeared from the trailer park in 2014. Henderson immediately contacted authorities, recognizing the potential significance of his discovery. Detective Lisa Morrison, who had taken over responsibility for cold cases, arrived at the scene within hours and confirmed that the vehicle's license plate matched Peterson's truck. Inside the submerged pickup truck, investigators discovered human remains that forensic analysis would later confirm belonged to Lucas and Sarah Miller. The condition of the remains made it difficult to determine the exact cause of death, but their discovery finally answered the question of what had happened to the cousins who had disappeared into the wheat fields 9 years earlier. The investigation revealed that Peterson had apparently approached the children while they were exploring the wheat fields, possibly claiming to be a ranch employee or someone who needed assistance. Once he had gained control of Lucas and Sarah, he had forced them into his truck and driven toward Buffalo Creek, where he had killed them before driving his vehicle into the water to conceal the evidence. Forensic examination of the truck revealed additional evidence that confirmed Peterson's involvement in the children's deaths. DNA analysis identified genetic material from both children inside the vehicle, along with Peterson's own remains, which were discovered in the driver's seat of the submerged truck. The investigation revealed that Peterson had apparently killed himself after murdering Lucas and Sarah, driving his truck into Buffalo Creek during the spring runoff when water levels were high enough to completely submerge the vehicle. His body had remained trapped in the truck for 9 years until the drought conditions exposed the crime scene. The resolution of the Miller case provided closure for the family, though it also brought the painful knowledge that Lucas and Sarah had been murdered by someone who had targeted them during what should have been a safe family gathering. The families found some comfort in finally knowing what had happened, but the senseless nature of the crime made their grief no less profound. The discovery led to changes in how rural law enforcement agencies investigate missing persons cases, particularly regarding the importance of thoroughly checking water sources and irrigation systems that might conceal evidence. The drought conditions that revealed Peterson's truck demonstrated how environmental factors could eventually expose crimes that had been successfully hidden for years. The Miller Ranch continues to operate as a working farm, though the annual family barbecues were discontinued after Lucas and Sarah's disappearance. The wheat fields where the children were last seen have been harvested and replanted numerous times since 2014, but the family members who remain involved in the farming operation will never view those fields the same way. A small memorial marker placed near the ranch house serves as a reminder of Lucas and Sarah Miller and the tragic fate that befell them during what should have been a joyful family celebration. The marker includes a plaque with both children's names and dates, along with an inscription that reads, "Forever in our hearts, forever missed." The case of Lucas and Sarah Miller serves as a reminder of how predators can exploit the trust and openness that characterize rural communities, and how quickly a normal family gathering can turn deadly when children become targets of violence. Their story continues to be studied by law enforcement professionals and used in training programs for investigators who specialize in missing persons and child abduction cases. The annual barbecue that should have created happy memories for two young cousins instead became the setting for their final hours together. The wheat fields that represented agricultural heritage and family tradition became the last place where Lucas and Sarah Miller were seen alive, before a predator transformed their exploration into tragedy. Today, the drought that revealed their fate has ended, and Buffalo Creek flows at normal levels once again. But for the Miller family, the discovery of that rusted pickup truck in the dried creek bed will always represent both the answer to their prayers for closure and the confirmation of their worst fears about what had happened to two children who loved visiting their grandfather's ranch. The investigation that began with a simple search of wheat fields ended 9 years later with the discovery of a submerged vehicle, proving that sometimes the most elusive answers are hidden not in the places where we expect to find them, but in the depths of waters that conceal the truth until nature itself decides to reveal what has been lost.